Chapter 3. Fighting for the Floor. There's a rule no one writes down, but everyone learns. The person who talks fastest owns the room. They don't have to be the smartest or the kindest, just the quickest. The one who can jump into a gap before it fully opens, fill it with sound, and hold it. When your words come slowly, you grow up watching this rule play out over and over. You see how conversations tilt toward the fluent ones, how their jokes land, how their complaints are heard, how their ideas get written on whiteboards and praised in staff meetings. And you learn something else, too. Some of us have to fight just to get to the first syllable. By the time I was in my late teens, my life had become a series of rooms where I was technically present, but often not really in the conversation.
Classrooms, family dinners, hospital appointments, uni tutorials, job interviews, friend groups around pub tables sticky with beer. Each one had its own tempo, its own unspoken choreography. I was always a half beat behind. When people talk about disability, they like to focus on the dramatic parts, the seizures, the hospital stays, the surgeries. They don't talk much about the 1,000 small ways you can be erased in perfectly ordinary settings. It starts with timing. In Year 11, we had group discussions in English. The teacher would push the desks into a loose circle, sit at the edge, and say, "All right, let's hear your thoughts on the text." I always had thoughts. The book lived vividly in my mind. I've underlined sentences, scribbled notes in the margins, turned over questions in my head while brushing my teeth.
Inside, I'd already composed what I wanted to say. The narrator is unreliable, but not because he's lying. It's because he's frightened. He edits his own memories to survive them. We all do versions of that. I'd rehearse it silently, polishing, trimming, choosing the shortest words I could. I knew from experience that the longer the word, the more places it could break. While I was doing that, 3 other hands would shoot up. I think. What I got from it was, yeah, but also. The room filled with overlapping voices. The teacher nodded, encouraging the volley. Opinions ricocheted back and forth. Someone interrupted someone else, and they both laughed. It was all so casual, so frictionless. I felt the moment where I should have spoken pass over me like a wave I couldn't catch. By the time I was ready to push the first sound out, the topic had already hopped to something else. Another scene, another character. If I forced it then, if I tried to drag everyone back to my point, I'd be marked as off-tempo, out of sync, and I'd still have to fight my own mouth to get the sentence out. So I stayed quiet. The teacher looked around. Anyone else? No? All right, moving on. I burned. "I'm here," I wanted to say. I had something. You just didn't give me the extra few seconds it takes to unwrap it. It wasn't just school. At home, family conversations had their own speed. My extended family was loud in the typical Australian way, voices over one another, quick teasing, stories embellished with each retelling. At barbecues, the men gathered near the grill, half serious about meat and fully serious about politics. The women clustered at the table, plates between them, swapping news and worry in equal measure. I'd sit somewhere in the middle, close enough to both circles to hear, not quite inside either. Someone would tell a story about work. Someone would one-up it. Laughter would swell, crest, fall. I'd hear a gap appear, feel an urge to step in. I know something about that. I read about it. That reminds me of. And then watch the gap snap shut as another voice slid in ahead of me. It was like trying to merge onto a highway where no one would slow down. I'd be blinking at the indicator, ready, lining it up, and then another car would roar past. In those moments, my silence became heavy, hot in my throat. Say it. Just jump. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just go. Go now. Now. My mouth opened. Someone else spoke. That reminds me, actually. The traffic moved on. No one was being deliberately cruel. That's the thing. If someone had stood up and said, "You're not allowed to talk," I could have pointed to it, named it, thought it. Instead, it was the sum of 100 small non-decisions, no one waiting that extra breath.
No one noticing the way my lips had parted, my body leaning forward, the sound forming and then retreating. You don't need an explicit ban when speed is the only real currency. I got used to watching people's eyes. You can tell a lot from where they rest. When I'd start speaking, slowly, cautiously, I'd watch the eyes of the group. The first second, they were on me, present, polite. By the second or third stumble, I could see eyes start to drift, down to their phone, across to someone else, over my shoulder. A little tightness would appear around their mouths, a flash of impatience quickly smoothed over. In that tiny movement, the message arrived, clear and devastating. You're taking too long. They almost never said it out loud. They didn't have to. Their attention did the talking. And then there were the people who thought they were helping. They'd jump in to finish my sentence. You mean, so what you're trying to say is... Sometimes they guessed right, sometimes they didn't. Either way, the damage was done. My thought, my struggle to give it shape, had been snatched out of my hands and tidied up for me. What I'm trying to say, I'd think bitterly. I know exactly what I'm trying to say. I just can't get it through the doorway as fast as you like. There's a particular humiliation in being translated in your own language. Doctors did it too. I'd sit in the exam room, listing symptoms in my head, prepared for the appointment like it was an oral exam. I'd rehearsed every point, every question. When the neurologist asked, "How have the seizures been?" I'd begin, "Well, the last was." He'd glance at the chart, at the printout from the last visit, then pivot to my mother. "And from your perspective?" he'd ask. "From your perspective." As if mine was already assumed to be incomplete, as if my hesitations made my account less reliable. My mother meant well when she answered. She was scared. She wanted to make sure he had the full picture. She'd fill in the blanks, tidy up the timeline, repeat what I'd told her the night before when we'd planned the appointment. But inside my chest, something twisted. "I am here," I wanted to shout. "Ask me. Wait for me. I lived it. I woke up on the floor. I know what it felt like." Instead, I sat quietly while the two of them talked over me, about me, occasionally to me, and the notes in the file grew longer. When we left, the doctor shook my hand and said, "Good work, mate. You're doing really well." I smiled stiffly and walked out, feeling like a piece of medical equipment that had passed its maintenance check. "Why didn't you say more?" my mother asked in the car. "You could have told him about the aura you had last week." "I tried," I said. I watched her grip the steering wheel tighter, frustration flaring briefly before she swallowed it. "I know," she said finally. "I'm sorry. I panic. I don't want him to miss anything." I understood, but the understanding sat on top of a quieter ache. If even the people who love you feel the need to speak for you, what chance do you have with everyone else? University made everything sharper. Tutorials were worse than high school discussions. There was more at stake. Marks attached. Participation recorded. The tutor would say, "This is worth 10% of your grade." And suddenly, everyone was elbowing each other for airtime. I'd sit there with my notebook open, pen in hand, ideas scribbled in the margins. The tutor would ask a question. "What do we make of the author's use of silence in this chapter?" Silence. The irony wasn't lost on me. My hand would twitch halfway up. I knew exactly what I wanted to say. Silence is doing as much work as the dialogue. It's not absence, it's pressure. It reveals power, who can choose to be silent, and who is silenced. I even had the sentence ready. Short words, simple structure, fewer traps. I waited for a gap. A girl across the table jumped in. "I think it's about trauma," she said. "Like, he can't talk about it, so he doesn't." The tutor nodded, encouraging. Someone else added, "Yes, it's like silence is a character in the book." More nods. "Yes," I thought. "Yes." And I leaned forward. I... The tutor glanced at me, then looked back to a louder voice already crashing over the next point. The moment slid past. I sat back, feeling that now familiar flush climb up my neck. The worst part was when they'd say, at the end of semester, "You need to participate more. We want to hear from you." Want to?
as if wanting was enough, as if I hadn't been wrestling every week with the double bind of timing and tongue. I tried to find cracks in the pace. I started staying back after tutes, packing my bag slowly, waiting for the room to empty a bit. When only a few students were left, I'd approach the tutor. "Hey," I'd say, heart pounding.
"About what you said. The silence thing." With fewer ears on me, with less competition for the floor, the words came a little easier. Not fluent, never that, but less freighted. I'd share my thoughts then, in the half-empty room. The tutor would listen, often genuinely interested. "That's a great point," they'd say. "You should bring that up in class next time." I'd nod, already knowing how unlikely that was, because next time the speed would take over again, and I would be back at the edge of the circle, watching my chance get trampled. Friendships were another kind of arena. In small groups, with people who knew me, conversations could be slower, at least at first. Sitting in someone's yard, leaning back in plastic chairs, talking rubbish late into the night, those were the pockets where I could breathe. But even there, the same patterns crept in. We'd be talking about music one night. Someone would ask, "What's your favorite album?" And the answers would fly. "OK Computer, Dark Side of the Moon, never mind, My Bloody Valentine, easy." They'd start debating rankings, trading lyrics, laughing at bad takes. I had my answer. I had a story even, a memory of listening to a particular record on a loop in hospital, the way it had held me together when everything else felt like it was coming apart. I opened my mouth. Mine's... Anyway, did you hear they're touring again?" Someone cut in, excitement crackling. I shut my mouth. The moment passed. The topic shifted to ticket prices, to who they'd go with, to logistics. My album, my story, stayed where so many of my words did, just behind my teeth. Inside, the anger flared. "Why did you cut across me? You saw I was about to speak. You heard the first sound. You did. You just decided your sentence was more important." Then another voice, softer, but just as cruel. "What did you expect? You take too long. You make it awkward. They're just keeping the flow going." Fighting for the floor became a constant mental negotiation. Is this point worth the effort? Is this story worth the struggle? Is this opinion worth risking the eye drift, the glossed-over smile, the half-interruption? More and more often, the answer was no. Not because I believed my thoughts were worthless, but because the cost of sharing them felt too high for the short, half-heard version that usually made it out. There's this thing people say, "You're so quiet." They say it like it's a compliment, or a mild curiosity. At parties, at work, at gatherings where I've spent an hour mostly listening, someone will turn to me with a tipsy smile and say, "You're very quiet, aren't you?" What they don't realize is that "you're so quiet" is code for "you're not fully here." What I hear under it is "you're not contributing. You're not adding to this. We don't know you." And the worst part is, I agree with them. They don't know me. Not the full running commentary in my head. Not the jokes I thought of 3 seconds too late to deliver. Not the questions I wanted to ask. Not the times I saw someone's face fall and wanted to check in but couldn't get the words out before someone else changed the subject. They know the edited version, the lagging, abridged cut, the one that speaks only when it's safe, only when there's space pre-cleared, only when the stakes are low. They think I'm reserved, shy, mysterious even, occasionally, if they're being generous. They don't see that most of my energy in social spaces goes into a kind of triage. Let that one go. Save your voice for something more important. Don't interrupt. Don't hold them up. Is it worth fighting for the floor right now? Workplaces are temples to the fast. Brainstorming sessions, in particular, are a special kind of hell. Standing by a whiteboard while everyone throws ideas out rapid fire, post-it notes, markers squeaking, someone shouting "no bad ideas" while absolutely judging the speed at which you contribute. I remember one session in a cramped, overheated meeting room, cups of coffee going cold on the table. "Okay," my manager said, marker uncapped, "let's throw out ways we could improve communications." Just yell them out. Go. Yell them out. I had one immediately. A clear, practical suggestion about accessibility, slower-paced videos, transcripts attached, time built in for people to respond in writing. I inhaled, leaned forward. What if we... Monthly newsletter, someone shouted. Internal podcast. More emails. Fewer emails. The marker squeaked frantically as my manager tried to keep up. Laughter bounced around the room. I waited. My idea sat, fully formed, pressing against the inside of my teeth. You'd think that if people are asking for ideas, they'd be prepared to wait, just a little. But the performance of brainstorming is all about speed, about showing you're switched on, agile, quick. By the time I wrestled my first full word into the air, we'd moved on.
The meeting ended with a whiteboard full of half-baked slogans, and no mention of the one thing that would have helped someone like me most: a different channel, a different pace, a space where I could think and respond without having to sprint. Later, at my desk, I typed out the suggestion in an email, clear, concise, no stutter on the screen. The manager wrote back, "This is a really good point. You should have brought it up in the meeting." I stared at the sentence. I did, I thought. You just didn't hear it, because it didn't arrive fast enough to be real to you. There's a particular shame in constantly being too late to your own contribution. The world's attention span is short. It rarely waits for the slower download. Sometimes people tried to comfort me. "I don't mind the stutter," a friend said once, well-meaning. "It's kind of cute." Cute, like a quirk, an endearing flaw in an otherwise smooth surface, not the daily grind of pushing every word uphill in a world that rewards downhill talkers. Other people tried to be practical. "Have you thought of joining a debate club?" a teacher suggested once, as if more exposure to verbal combat would strengthen the very muscles that betrayed me every time I opened my mouth. I wanted to ask her if she'd recommend a marathon to someone whose legs gave out randomly without warning, but I didn't. I just nodded and said, maybe. The internal monologue, meanwhile, grew sharper. In rooms where I barely spoke, my mind narrated everything. He's interrupting her again. She's laughing, but it didn't land. You could add something here. They've misunderstood that point. Correct it? No, too risky. Wait, there's that look again, the one they give you when you stall on the first word. Don't start. Too late. They're already moving on. I began to see conversations almost like a sport I wasn't built for. Who dominates possession of the floor? Who passes? Who hogs? Who gets benched? I noticed patterns. The men who spoke over women. The extroverts who answered their own questions before anyone else could respond. The people whose opinions were treated as default, and those whose contributions were treated as add-ons. It wasn't just about me. It was about power. Speech is how people claim space, how they assert themselves, how they prove they belong. If you can't grab the floor and hold it, you're consigned to the edges, no matter how much you have to say. Sometimes, late at night, lying in bed, I'd replay conversations and imagine the version where I'd spoken. At the family barbecue, I cut across the story, just once, and everyone stopped and listened, and I told mine, and they laughed in the right places. In the tutorial, I raised my hand first. The tutor called on me. I stumbled on the first word, but they waited. I finished the thought. Someone built on it. My idea was in the room, no matter how ragged the delivery. In the brainstorm, I wrote the suggestion on the whiteboard myself. No one erased it. It anchored the whole plan. It's a quiet kind of grief, losing conversations you never actually had. The humiliation isn't always in the obvious moments, the laughter when you trip over a word, the awkward correction when someone pretends they didn't understand you. It's in the constant, low-level knowledge that people are forming impressions of you based on a tiny, struggling fraction of who you are. They see the pauses, the stumbles, the withdrawn posture when the talking gets fast. They fill in the blanks with their own assumptions. Shy, simple, passive, not that bright. You feel them talking around you, over you, about you, as if you're furniture. And sometimes, to your horror, you start to internalize it. Maybe I am the quiet one. Maybe I don't have that much to say. Maybe I should just let the others handle it, less embarrassing for everyone. But deep down, beneath all that, there's another voice.
The one that never stutters, never blanks out, never gets cut off. It whispers, furious and clear, "You are not empty." On the days when the frustration threatened to tip into something darker, I'd test it. I'd sit alone in my room and speak out loud, just to myself. No audience, no rush. Sometimes the words came easier there, in the safety of four walls and no expectation. Sometimes they didn't. But either way, I could hear my own effort, unfiltered by anyone else's impatience. I'd talk about the stupidest things, the rubbish TV show I'd watched, the article I'd read, a memory from childhood, just to prove, to myself, if to no one else, that the thoughts existed, that the blocks didn't erase them. When that wasn't enough, I wrote. Not in a diary sense, not at first, just scraps, notes on my phone, lines in the margins of lecture printouts, half-started emails I never sent. On paper, the floor was always mine. No one could cut across a sentence. No one could glance away halfway through a line. No one could tidy it up for me. The words arrived at their own pace, but once they were there, they stayed. I didn't think of it as communication at the time. I thought of it as storage. Somewhere to put the overflow. Because that's what relentless dismissal does in the end. It doesn't just silence you in the moment. It builds up a backlog, a reservoir of unsaid things, opinions, complaints, jokes, questions, affection, anger. All the times I wanted to say, "That's not funny," when someone made a joke at my expense, but didn't. All the times I wanted to say, "Wait, I'm not finished," but let the interrupter win. All the times I wanted to shout, "Stop calling me quiet like it's a personality type. I am quiet because I am not allowed to take up the same amount of space as you." They all went somewhere. They didn't disappear. They found their way into the only space that was entirely mine, the internal monologue. Later, much later, that monologue would have to become my only form of speech. It would have to learn to shine through writing and gesture and presence alone. But back then, in the years when my voice still existed but rarely got the floor, that inner voice was something else. It was proof. Proof that I was more than the pauses and the half-phrases and the awkward fade-outs. Proof that even when the world moved too fast to hear me, I was still here, thinking in full sentences. The quiet humiliation of being dismissed never really left. It layered, year after year, event after event. But so did the awareness. Every time someone interrupted me, every time a room moved on without waiting, every time a doctor angled their body toward the person beside me instead of me, I noticed. And even when I swallowed my protest, even when I said nothing, even when I let the moment go, a part of me kept score. Not for revenge, just to remember. Because that's the thing about fighting for the floor your whole life. Even when you lose, you learn exactly how the room works, who's allowed to speak, who gets cut off, who is patiently listened to, stumbling and all, who isn't. You see it all, you catalogue it, you understand, long before most people, that being heard has very little to do with how much you have to say, and everything to do with how fast the world is willing to move. And you start to imagine, in a way that both hurts and sustains you, what it would be like to live in a world that does wait, one more beat, one more breath, long enough for the word to make it all the way from your chest to the air.